second to last lecture. So welcome. It is lecture number 5. And there we go. This is where we are. As you can see, 4 done, 2 to go. Today it's going to be about tools and workshops, a little bit about canvases. Sprints are so close relations to workshops that we're going to cover them at the same time. And then last week, we're going to be wrapping things up, closing and reflection and looking forward as well. And I guess we have like half planned next week's lecture, but we're going to sit down with Jari on Tuesday and actually really plan based on everything you have done and the feedback and everything. A little bit tailoring the final lecture for you. Which brings me to Jari. Reflections and learning from exercise 4.
Okay, I will share my my slides here. I'm apparently sharing now, right?
Yes.
Okay, so some reflections and some issues raised from your reports. So last week's exercise or this week's exercise was about reflective dialogue or coaching dialogue, and the purpose. Some of you wondered a bit the purpose in your report. What was the point of this exercise? But it was to get experience on deliberate role taking, meaning that as facilitators or coaches, it's a deliberate role, and how to take it, how to keep it, and how to act in that role in a proper way. That's one core issue, core thing. What we have to practice and exercise to become a facilitator, and that's like one learning point. The other thing was to get experience on reflective conversation, which is, I think many of you reported that it's familiar in a way, but here it was also that you had shared the experience, you had the shared experience on this course, and of course it was kind of meta thing to, in the middle of the course or in the latter part of the course, a little bit wrap up and have an exercise. This is part of the course, how it's going, and it was interesting to read your experiences on this, and of course experience on listening. So, and which is a crucial part of the role of facilitator or coach, how to listen carefully and in a productive way. And then fourth was get experience on helpful relating, because this is also that facilitator or coach is a helper, and then how to have this kind of helpful stance or how to relate in a helpful way. So all this was kind of purpose of the exercise. And then what happened? Reading your reports were a big delight for me. So it was really nice reading through your reports, and there was a lot of fascinating learnings reported and a lot of good stories, even in short few sentences, but they was very rich in that sense. And some of you wrote a bit larger stuff, and apparently the exercise was useful for vast majority of you, and many mentioned that it was even fun to do. And that was very nice to read. And then some amazements was expressed how just 15-minute dialogue can make a difference. So that was very delightful to read and interesting to read. And then quite a bit realizations how listening is much more than just hearing the words. And here it's really this, that when we are facilitating a process, it's also listening to the process. What's happening in a group? What else is what is said, but what is not said, and what's the atmosphere, what's the feeling, and all that is listening to the process, and that's something what we have to do, and it's a core capability of or skill of a good facilitator, and actually there's some realizations about this as well. But then, of course, some as in all exercises, there's also challenges, and this listening deliberately, this and letting other to talk and supporting that. So how to keep curious here and now stance. And this is something which is quite core stuff of facilitation as well. And we can, of course, exercise this in everyday life as well. And it can be sometimes beneficial in many situations. And then keeping up the role, how to not start sharing your own experiences. And that was very actually mentioned in the assignment, that because in normal conversation, we start doing that. But of course, when we are in a facilitation process or mode, it's not forbidden. So it's not in a way, because sometimes it can seem a bit rude that we don't share anything about our own experience. But we can think that our experience is not just advice that do this because this is my experience, but it was something that we can tell our experience, that in past other project we had this kind of thing. What do you think about that? So bringing your own experience as a resource is another thing than giving advice. And so and of course it can build trust to your ability to be facilitator because you have some experience before. But being again aware and deliberate when to do it and how to do it. And then of course, what are the questions to in a coaching, how to ask good helping questions. And in many ways they are very kind of minimal sometimes. That what do you think about this? How was this experience for you? And because we easily ask complicated questions, or we ask bit leading questions or closed things. And I think good point when asking, it's not about our curiosity to know, but it's more about your willingness to talk. And so that's what you want to tell me about this. So having this stance can be very, very kind of more helpful. And then of course, what the person says, then we can ask more, dig deeper. What kind of meanings and so forth. And so, but this is also it's a kind of how we practice, how we exercise this, and we can do that as a part of our everyday life. And some further points. Some of you raised this as well, but willing now to talk about this participation part of facilitation. So one core thing is that the facilitator coach should enable a safe space for the client to talk and reflect on. So allowing, inviting, and encouraging atmosphere. And so it's not just asking, but it's this part of the relating, how we build this kind of safe environment to talk. And then we, as facilitators, we should enable an experience of appreciation, competence, involvement, and progress. So it's not just nice talk, but in the facilitation, we should, of course, achieve some results, make meanings, so that there's a feeling, experience of making progress. And that's something when we are doing a change. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainties, there are a lot of emotions involved, and such things beneath the surface. But when we can build a safe environment, safe atmosphere, and then feeling of progress and involvement, all that can enable us really to make a good progress. And that builds the community as well. So it's not just achieving, so transforming the organization from A to B, but it's building a community of trust and this kind of collective feeling of competency and self-efficacy. And as I said, that this way of working in a change should represent the culture we are trying to build. And so facilitation is relational living process, not just applied set of methods. But of course, we need these methods to give a structure and get results. But I think the core is that it's this kind of living social process we have to nurture as facilitators. So our aim, our focus should be in the process and involvement. And then, so becoming a facilitator is based on experiences and experiential learning. So a lot of practice and practicing. And then we learn and reflect on those experiences and building our competence to be and to in a helpful role. And I would argue, of course, I have a bit this participation and relational lenses to look, but I would argue that the core is in genuine interest to be helpful and allowing the client to be responsible and accountable for the answers and solutions. And that was talked last week's and before that already, that as a facilitator, we are focusing process and we should enable the client to construct the idea, to build the content for the process or outcomes. But that's then the dividends in a way, in roles. But great work, great. I was very happy for your reports, and hopefully this carry on for next. Encourage you to practice and learn more and exercise these also in everyday life. It's a good opportunity to be a good practice, good listening, and maybe a good questions as well. But okay, that's all. And if you have any comments on this, so please put in the chat. But now I think it's time for Risto to continue.
There's Jari one comment, so have a look while I switch screens.
Yes. I think Hanna-Sofia, there's a very good point of this, that listening is much richer way than just the words. So there's a lot of stuff happening, and as a facilitator, we should listen and observe the whole situation, what's happening, what's emotion, what's collective atmosphere, and sensitize that, and keep ourselves in a tone of the process, and then kind of act accordingly. All right, but thanks on my behalf.
Yeah, thanks, Jari. And I'm really going to underline the obvious thing, which you said, that these are pretty good skills in life in general. I mean, being a good listener is, I think, a universal truth of being a good human being. At least personally, I sometimes need to remind myself outside of work that, I could actually try to be a really good listener also at home and in my other human relationships as well. Rauli has a question. Are there any big no-nos for a facilitator? Well, I think definitely there are. Yeah. Do you want to say a few, Jari, before I go forward?
Yeah, okay. I can write something.
Okay. So that was last week. And really today is going to be, well, we're running out of lectures already, but it's going to be probably the most hands-on practical lecture that we're having. And the reason I think that should be obvious at this stage, because we have made you do all those exercises, that there is this kind of very high-flying theoretical part, abstract things. We started with uncertainty and different, visions of leadership and all of that. But at the end of the day, you are there, and there's another human being, or two of them, or three of them, or 300 of them, and you need to do something. So that's why today is really dedicated on hands-on facilitation. And especially looking at the tools. How do you use specific tools to facilitate more or less specific questions? And the questions I'm going to talk about today, the kind of the outcomes you're trying to facilitate from people, I would say, in my experience, are typical things that you're dealing with, whether you're, as a knowledge worker, a person making innovation or design or creating new business. And again, just to remind you, the focus today is on facilitation, not that much as a participant or the decision maker when you're building things or doing stuff. And the slide from a few lectures back was this, that we have all of these different tools, and there's like a little bit one of the most popular. There are tools and ways of thinking or schools of thought. And the list there in the below in the text. So how do you facilitate others to use these tools? you might be very fluent with the business model canvas, or you might be a big fan of some kind of a customer journey map. But how do you facilitate the other people to start using them as well, either together with you, or if you want this tool or the impact of the tool to scale within your organization? You call the midwife, just like that television series, and midwife as a facilitator. And really, again, before I start emphasizing this point of you as the midwife, as a person who helps others to succeed, it's not about you, it's not your baby. There are maybe other people, this is especially if you're an external facilitator and you're asked there to literally to facilitate the process. It's not your baby, it's not your ideas that they're giving birth to, but you're helping them to become better ideas, or maybe you're helping the ideas to become a reality, and so forth and so forth. And this, of course, begs the question that you have popped up occasionally in the chat. Okay, what if I'm not an external facilitator? Many of you are, you're the manager, you're the boss, you're the leader, you might be the product owner, or maybe you're a team member. You're not external, you're part of the team that needs to get things done, that needs to succeed. Yes, that is a different role from an external facilitator. However, I think it's also a mindset thing. Whether you're the boss, whether you're the product owner, whether you're a team member, I think today we all appreciate that you can take this approach that you're helping others to succeed. If you're a really good boss in a knowledge working environment, a lot of your work is helping the people working under you to succeed. If you're a product owner, yes, you're trying to help the product succeed, but for that product to succeed, you need the team to succeed, individuals to succeed, customers to succeed. So there is this very kind of human facilitating midwifing perspective that you can definitely take in practically any role that you have actually. So keep that in mind, and maybe that's something we're going to come back to next week in that wrapping up of that whole lecture series. However, now we're going to focus on tools and getting hands dirty, and how do we help other people use the tools that we have chosen. And although I talk about not like super specific tools, but relatively specific tools that I think most of you are familiar with, you can see that this applies into a much wider thing. And there are two steps. The first step, obvious, is that if you need to know the toolbox and the methods. Even if you're the person doing the stuff, or you're the facilitator introducing the tools, you need to understand the tools really well, because you need to be able to communicate, why are we using this tool? Why are we doing this exercise? Why are we using this method? And so forth. And I put it there, that's the difference between a professional and a zombie. Because the zombie takes the lean canvas, for example, and then just puts it over there and says, now we should use it. And then assume that everybody just uses it like a zombie or a robot, without understanding the reasons why this canvas exists, without understanding why this tool is the best tool for this situation. And the thing is that we need to remember that whatever tools we take, they are not only for doing stuff. We take some simple tools that I might have here lying around, like pliers or something like this. This is a very simple tool, and this is meant for doing. This tool exists for me to do things physically and get results. However, when we go into these tools, and I would even say those pliers over there, they have also a different dimension, because tools are also for communication, that we might be using a tool together that's actually the main purpose is to communicate stuff. Or maybe actually the main purpose is to research stuff. Or maybe the point of the tool is to engage others. And yes, the tool is also for doing stuff as well. So let's go over those four things and what I mean by them, and helping you to kind of dig deeper into the tool set that you might be using. Or if you want to learn a new tool, you can look at it from these different angles. So what I mean by tools for communication is that often we're using tools to sell ideas, especially in a larger, a community, an organization. We get an idea that, we should be doing this. Now you need to convince other people that this is what we should do. So use tools for communicating and selling ideas, arguing your decisions, clarifying complex things. Remember some of the tools we used in this class? Or somehow to bring order into chaos. That's a communication factor as well. And there are a couple of tools I listed over there are very good at communication as well. Customer journeys, service blueprints, business model canvas, so forth and so forth. And if you have a tool and you're thinking whether, is this a good tool for communication? And I put a very simple kind of sparring question over there to see the communication value is that if I was alone in this project, would I use this tool? If I would say, no, I wouldn't use this if I was alone. Then, that tool is really a communication tool. If you yourself was the whole company and you're the only customer, you don't need to communicate anything because everything is inside your head already. So that was the first one, the communication dimension. The second one is what I call is researching. So this is separate from doing. So doing is the stuff that I actually start doing things with the tool and getting results, building an application or, changing an organization. But certain tools have a lot of value in gathering knowledge. But before we actually start anything, we need to learn things. Maybe we need to analyze data. Maybe we need to grasp the current situation and so forth and so forth. And again, a list of examples there. I have interviewing techniques as tools, shadowing users or other people, data analysis and all of that, literature studies, so forth and so forth. We need tools for researching as well. And the sparring question here is that if you think that you know enough, would you use this tool? If you feel as a team or individually that now we know enough, we just need to get things done, then these tools are not necessarily the ones you want. The third dimension is engaging, which is of course a huge part of facilitation course here. So some tools have a lot of value in helping other people to contribute, getting their opinions, ensuring that there's a diverse perspective before we make the actual decision. And also, stuff like what Jari talked about, building an atmosphere, making sure that everybody feels safe to contribute and so forth. Think about the tools and methods we use to do that as well. And of course, that if we want to do things well, we need a certain richness for ideas. And also we need from the people ownership and commitment as well. And that's part of engaging also. So I would say brainstorming, the stuff we are all familiar with. In my experience, it's not that good at coming up with good ideas. Actually, in my design course, I don't use brainstorming for the teams to come up with good ideas. I use Google Sprint methods for that. But brainstorming is actually really good for engaging people. Think about it. Think about the last time you had. Which brought more value? The actual ideas in the brainstorming or the actual cohesion and the togetherness that the brainstorming exercise did? So the sparring question here is that I put it like this: if all my coworkers were machines, would I use this tool? Which is just underlining the fact that we are social human beings. And this is the whole participation part we talked a few lectures back. And we need to take and use the humanness of ourselves. If everybody else was just a machine, we don't need to engage machines. No, there's no need to do that at all. And finally, of course, there are tools for doing stuff. That's what, when people say tools, this is obviously the first thing that comes to my mind. The tool is meant to do things. And, in this context, maybe it's taking the design further or, taking a big task and helping to work it piece by piece and so forth and so forth. So prototypes, I think they are really good tools and methods for doing stuff. Experiments, customer journey is a great actually tool that is also very heavy on communication, but also actually it takes things forward. And the sparring question is that if you didn't have to do things, if you were just giving presentations and communicating ideas, would you use this tool? If my only job was to communicate how to install these bottle holders on bikes, I don't need this tool. I don't need any tool. I need a communication tool. So maybe that's a sparring question to help you figure out what's the practical value of a tool. And when we put these four together, we get this 4 dimensions. That as a professional that we have in our toolbox, we have a lot of tools and methods and ways of working. We can take each of them and look at these from these 4 dimensions. That how much value this brings for researching, how much value does this tool or method bring in communicating, and how much this is about engaging, and how much is this actually about doing, getting shit done. So that's really part 1. Looking, the obvious thing I think you're all familiar with is that the methods and tools you really need to understand, you need to dig deeper in them to become a really good professional. Because that's the only way that you can know that, in this situation, I think we need this tool. Or when people ask you, why are we using this method? You go like, yeah, well, actually, these are the reasons that this method helps us to do this, but it also helps us to do that as well. That was step 1. Little breather for any comments in the chat or everything. Ooh, I like the facilitator competencies needed with a teenager at home. Now that's like the super master class. We're not going to go there. I guess a lot of listening works as well. Okay, step number 1, understand your tools and dig deeper with them. To become a really good professional, know each tool really well. Step 2, in facilitating, hands-on. I'm going to go now through a couple of things and examples, like I said, of how to help others to use the tools. So like I put it here, the difference between a facilitator or a solo artist. You can only go so far if you're the master of the tools and you come to the room and you're the only one who understands them. That doesn't scale, to put it bluntly. And rather than having a bunch of studies and books about this, because I haven't really found many, this pretty much, just to be transparent, this is really from my experience. And my experience comes from a lot of service design, business design, organization design, facilitating company accelerators and change programs, and working a little bit with startups and coaching, training, lecturing thousands of people in the past 10 years. And to be honest, this is kind of like, okay, what I have learned, but what are the typical problems and how to solve them? So for whatever it's worth, here we go. 3 topics, and I'm going to go through them one by one. How to facilitate the following. How do we facilitate other people to think strategically and answer? It's not enough that they think, but they need to write down answers, strategic answers. 2, customer perspective. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. And this is kind of the whole, this is why user-centric design was born, because people have so much difficulties in taking the customer perspective. Let's talk a little bit about that as well. And then the 3rd one, which is also very, very general, ideas and concepting. What are the typical problems and maybe how to solve them? As a facilitator, try the other people to get the answers. Remember, you're the midway. Let's go. Facilitating strategic thinking. Or in other words, giving birth to clear objectives. Yes, objectives, objectives, objectives. That's what we're clarifying and polishing the whole this course. That's true. And here's the first about this topic. Answering strategic questions is difficult. It's not easy. If you work for a big organization, you don't probably have all the knowledge. Maybe the strategy in itself is not that clear. So just answering the questions isn't trivial. But in my experience, having people to write them down is even more difficult, which kind of makes sense. If answering is difficult, then how do I clarify this into a sentence, for example? And this is pretty much the stuff we did already. These are the tools you have been using in the exercises. Asking things like, what is our objective? How does it link to our strategy? The dumb metrics. How do we know we are done? These are questions to clarify the strategic thinking and the strategy. And by strategy, I mean kind of broadly speaking, the kind of the long-term, bigger objectives that we are typically part of. And my quick answers as a facilitator, how to help with these problems is, like it says there, you need to be a little bit balanced. You need to, balancing the other people's answers. You want them to answer, but you don't want really broad answers like, oh, our strategy is to become a bigger business. Yes, but can you be a little bit more specific? And if they go like too specific, well, we need to get this done by next week. That's a little bit more too specific. So it's actually a facilitator of finding the right balance and listening to people again. Just like what Jari said about own experiences, I think that's a great way of giving examples, not giving the right answers, but giving examples. But last week I was working with these people and they wrote something like this. Would this make sense for you? And that's a really good way of helping people to calibrate and find out what is a good answer. What are they supposed to answer? And tricks such as listening people and going like, okay, I've listened to you guys now for 5 minutes. Now, if I put this together, if I summarize what you've been saying, is it something like this? And then people are like, yeah, that's pretty good, except that you might add this. So as a facilitator, you can see it's a very small but effective trick. Listen to people, summarize it, give the summarization back, and let them work on it again. And you can do that a couple of times, obviously. And, again, you don't have to be like a super boss person. You can be just the ordinary guy or gal in the team and go like, hey, I've been listening to you now for a while. Did I get this right? Is this what our strategy is all about? An excellent way of facilitating clarity in those questions. And last is turning the tables, a little bit of role playing, saying like, hey, let's imagine I'm the CFO of the company. How would you convince me to invest in your project? Yeah, same questions again, the ones on the left-hand side pretty much. But now there's a little bit of a role play. Maybe that helps people to answer. And this is a very practical problem in this scenario as well. Often the decision maker is not there. We're having a workshop or a sprint or doing whatever, and we don't know. The boss person isn't here. And then everybody feels like we cannot move forward. Now, this is something you need to be aware of. So whenever you're planning a workshop or anything similar, make sure that the decision maker is somehow available. And if that person is not available, then think that you can still move forward in some aspects, and then just schedule as fast as possible for the decision maker to come and tell what is the thing that, to make the decision. And then the third one about this strategic thinking is accountability, especially if you're using canvases like a business model canvas or, brainstorming. Sometimes people feel like these are silly exercises. This is not hard business, These are not numbers. We're putting Post-its on a wall. This is a silly exercise. So the quick answer to get accountability is to make people accountable. Bring in real people. Bring in the boss, the decision maker. Have a real person there Maybe it's a real customer and they need to answer these things. Or what is typically done, of course, is that you make the participants present their thinking to other people, which is using social pressure to create accountability. So yeah, this might be a silly exercise, but you know what? In 2 hours, you need to present this to 500 people. You get accountability pretty fast. So that was the first of the three, and then still 2 to go. The customer perspective. I guess this is very familiar to many of you. How to do that? Well, of course, the fact is that seeing the person's worldview is difficult. Being empathic is difficult. It's not that easy to understand how other people see the world, especially if they're very different from you. And here's kind of, there's a lot of text here, but just a very quick tips that I find really useful. First of all, to understand that when you start talking to people about the customers of their business, they typically start listing the rational reasons. Why do people do things? And they hardly ever go to the emotional, the feelings, which are, of course, part of any kind of a relationship, even a business relationship. We're just writing down. Let's write down the rational stuff. And once it's there on the table, we start thinking about the feelings and the kind of the next level of why do people do what they do. And related to that, the other bullet point is that typical people, you need to help them to say that, okay, let's think about the operative perspective, the daily life. So if we're doing a business-to-business service for managers, what does the manager's daily life look like? And then it's a totally different question to think about more strategically in the long term. So if we can help them on their daily problems, but how do we help them in the long run, in a year or 2 years? Who do they want to become? What does this company want to become? What does this consumer want to become? And of course, how do you make the participants willing to open their eyes and mind and so forth? This is a typical question. Maybe you have faced it, that whenever you bring new methods, new thinkings, new tools, you're like, this is consumer business. We're in the business to business. We don't need to think about this at all. Feelings, that's consumer business. We are in the hard business of selling trucks or something like that. Feelings don't matter. Of course they do matter. And if you dig into this B2C, B2B, diverse, dichotomy deeper, it just doesn't hold. There can be business to business organizations that are even more face-to-face than any consumer business. And of course, then individual people's feelings matter, and all of the kind of the consumer tools become extremely relevant. And the way to do this is the third bullet, is just to start talking about the sales process, for example. So if this is hard business to business where people make only rational decisions, let's look at the sales process. How does it go? Where do you engage their customers, and how do you engage with them? What's the communication, and so forth and so forth. And suddenly it kind of goes away from glass buildings talking to glass buildings, into individual humans talking with individual humans, and everything that is human starts to matter. And then 2 more quick things about customer perspective. First of all, a very quick trick is this is especially for all you designers and user-centric researchers and design people. If you want to convince other people of how customer perspective matters and is hard business and hard quantitative numbers, talk their language. Those are my favorite concepts, especially from the mobile gaming world. I think that's a really good place where there is not so much about this division between user-centric and business. But look at those concepts. Customer lifetime value. It's a beautiful concept. It has the customer perspective, but it's very business-driven and typically has a number behind it. The same goes with the acquisition costs. And then concepts such as customer conversion, retention, our growth, they're all tied into how the customers behave. So, if you're having a hard time convincing the customer centricity, maybe you should start talking these very customer centric things, this language that has numbers and business already built into it. And then you can suddenly see that, wow, to really understand the customer lifetime value, we need to start talking with these customers and understanding their strategies and so on. But again, this is a hard thing, and this is a white paper I wrote many, many years ago, is 6 powerful excuses not to engage with customers. It's much, much easier not to engage with the end users or the customers. And there are 6 reasons. Just simply fear of facing new people. It's a mental task to meet new people. Fear of being wrong. I was always telling them that it's like this, and now the customers are telling the opposite. I'm wrong. Not my job. I'm the product manager. I'm not a designer. I don't need to talk to customers. Not seeing the value of qualitative data. So difficult to get them. Where do I get the customers? I don't know. I don't have anybody's phone number. I'm not going to do this. And then, last but not least, is getting out of the mental office. Doing something new, meeting people, engaging, listening, facilitating. One more to go. Ideation and concepting. How do we facilitate stuff such as brainstorming? Well, first, before I want to emphasize that I hardly ever ask anybody to come up with ideas for a solution, whether it's a new service or a new product or some kind of innovation. I think the value proposition is a much better concept. So asking people to build, ideate, create value propositions is much more powerful than just asking for ideas, because ideas can be anything. But a value proposition is much more focused and actionable. And there's a picture of the value proposition canvas, which is a great tool for this. Because a value proposition includes the customer and the organization, and that they need to have a relationship between them. So I definitely encourage everybody to, rather than if you do brainstorming or ideation, be very conscious that ideas are typically not actually very actionable. Brainstorming is great for engaging people. Coming up with solutions, there are other tools that are better. So maybe brainstorm for value propositions. And then a tool that has kind of 2 different angles I'm going to introduce before the break. Customer journey as a conversion funnel. So what's the journey of your customers? Of all the customers you have, how do they become your customers? And the conversion funnel means that this is now you looking how people find your business. How do they find about you? How do they purchase it? How do they use it? And so forth. So it's a funnel for all the customers. How do you get the ones that you want? And the thing about this customer journey is that it's such a great tool and such a rich tool that you can use it for 20 minutes in a workshop, or you can work 20 days on it, because it poses so many good questions of how and what should we do about this. And of course, the other customer tool, and not to mix them, is the customer journey tool, is the experience mapping. So if this one is really about how do you want your customers to find your service and start using it, this is a totally different perspective. This is how your customers experience the thing. So for example, like taking a journey on a train, and you're the ticket provider. The journey starts from home, where the train is not at all. They need to get to the station. So for the customer, the journey is different and the experience is different than the actual funnel or the journey that you are going to design. But together, these are extremely powerful tools, kind of the 2 sides of the same coin. What's the experience of your customers? And what is the actual funnel that you're building on this? So as a concepting tool, as a thing to take ideas, I would definitely, after the brainstorming, after having a value props, I typically push them into this two different customer journeys of thinking, how do you think this would go for the customer and for the company? And one more before the break. Sorry if this is coming pretty fast. The business model canvas, which is one of the, maybe the first canvas that started the whole fashion of canvases. And the first point I want to make about it is that always asking who will pay and what is always a very powerful facilitation question. So whatever you're doing, at some stage you're like, okay, so who's paying for this and what are they paying? Are they paying money? Are they paying resources? Are they giving their grandmother? Are they giving their emails? What are they paying for this? And this is not necessarily a really good communication tool. This is a good engagement tool, but be wary of not giving PowerPoint presentations based on the business model canvas. And the other part of this, that often just getting numbers into that process, whenever you're doing innovation work, design, new things, it's always a very sobering thing. And the business model canvas is really good for that. But remember, the business model canvas is meant for a business model of a service or a product. It's not the same as a business case in a larger corporation. Or if you're working to make an organizational change, then the business model canvas doesn't necessarily work at all. Or if the business you're creating is part of the corporate's larger business, the business model canvas assumes that this is an individual business. It's kind of more, it kind of assumes that this is more or less kind of a startup that is coming with a standalone business. It doesn't have that well, that your business might be part of a larger business. Okay, that was part one. And if that was too fast, I'm gonna reward you with first with a break. And then actually right after the break, we're gonna have the first breakout. So 5 minutes, so that's 17:07 Eastern European time we continue. Any questions or comments, put into the chat, please.